Bernie Sanders is a different kind of politician. He's the longest-serving independent in the history of the U.S. Congress, representing the small northeastern state of Vermont as both a congressman and now a senator since 1991. He's wildly popular in his home state, winning 71% of the votes in his last election. Sanders calls himself a democratic socialist. Not that kind of socialist, that kind. His aim is to make the United States more like Scandinavia. You know, the nations with the most generous social policies that have in turn made their societies the happiest, most prosperous, and arguably the most equal on Earth. But who is Bernie Sanders? Bernard Sanders was born in Brooklyn, New York in 1941. His father, Eli, a paint salesman, was a Jewish immigrant from Poland whose family was killed in the Holocaust. Dorothy, his mother, was born in New York City. The Sanders were poor, with Bernie and his older brother Larry sleeping in the living room of the family's one-bedroom apartment. It was Larry who introduced him to political ideas. In elementary school, Bernie won a state championship in basketball and was captain of the track team in high school. After a year at Brooklyn College, he transferred to the University of Chicago, the school where President Obama would teach constitutional law years later. While earning his bachelor's degree there, Sanders became active in the civil rights movement. He was arrested for leading sit-in protests against segregated campus housing and participated in the 1963 March on Washington, where Martin Luther King Jr. gave his I Have a Dream speech.
Thank God Almighty, we are free at last.
After college, Sanders married his college sweetheart, Deborah Schilling, and moved to Vermont, working as a writer and carpenter. Bernie and Deborah divorced after 2 years of marriage without any children. His first and only biological child, a son, was born to Susan Campbell Mott in 1969. In the early 70s, Bernie began his political career, losing 2 races for governor and 2 for senator. He then served as director of the nonprofit American People's Historical Society, where he made a 30-minute documentary about American socialist leader and presidential candidate Eugene V. Debs. In 1981, Sanders won his first election, becoming the only independent mayor in America, leading the small city of Burlington, Vermont, with a population of around 40,000. The campaign energized thousands of new voters and set a record for voter turnout there. Among the accomplishments of his 8 successful years in office was the establishment of the first municipal housing land trust in the country for affordable housing, a project that became a model emulated throughout the world. Sanders allowed citizens to call him up in the middle of the night for any reason, and earned a reputation for being extraordinarily industrious. He balanced the budget, brought a minor league baseball team to the city, and won an important battle with a developer over the city's waterfront along beautiful Lake Champlain. The plan Sanders supported was implemented, and today there are miles of public beaches and bike paths, a boathouse, many parks, and a science center. Around the end of his time as mayor, he married Jane Driscoll, a former president of Burlington College. Bernie considers her 3 children from a previous marriage as his own. Today, Bernie and Jane have 7 grandchildren. In 1990, Sanders became the first independent elected to the U.S. House of Representatives in 40 years, but he was flat broke when he won the seat. In fact, he and Jane had to borrow some money from a friend to go on vacation in Mexico for a week after winning. During his 16-year tenure as Vermont's one and only congressman, he co-founded the Congressional Progressive Caucus. Not long after, Congress passed Sanders' first signed piece of legislation to create the National Program of Cancer Registries, what some have called the cancer weapon America needed most at the time. In 1993, Sanders voted against the Brady Bill that mandated federal background checks on gun purchases, although he currently supports a ban on semi-automatic weapons and wants to close gun show loopholes and create instant background checks for gun purchasers. After returning from a tour of factories in Mexico, Sanders explained his position against the North American Free Trade Agreement by saying, quote, "If NAFTA passes, corporate profits will soar because it will be even easier than now for American companies to flee to Mexico and hire workers there for starvation wages." End quote. In 1998, Sanders cautioned that investment and commercial banks should be kept separate, and voted against the repeal of parts of the Glass-Steagall Act. So, in a way, Bernie saw the economic trouble on the horizon that arrived a decade later. Sanders stood up to the major pharmaceutical companies by becoming the first member of Congress to take busloads of his constituents across the border to Canada to buy lower-cost prescription drugs, including a group of cancer patients who were able to purchase their medications for just 1/10 the price charged in the States. The following month, Sanders led an effort to fight IBM on their plan to cut older workers' pensions by as much as 50%. As a result, IBM agreed to a $320 million legal settlement with some 130,000 IBM workers and retirees. Sanders voted against the first Gulf War in 1991 and the invasion of Iraq in 2003, and predicted much of what ended up happening in that conflict.
Who will govern Iraq when Saddam Hussein is removed? And what role will the U.S. play in an ensuing civil war that could develop in that country? Will moderate governments in the region who have large Islamic fundamentalist populations be overthrown and replaced by extremists?
He also voted against the Patriot Act, the post-9/11 law that greatly expanded the powers of the NSA. In 2006, Sanders defeated Vermont's richest man and was elected as an independent to the U.S. Senate, receiving the support of several Democratic leaders, including then Senator Obama. Sanders quickly became one of the Senate's leading progressives. Ever the hard-working utilitarian, Bernie secured $3.2 billion to fund an energy efficiency and conservation grant program, $12.5 billion to expand federally qualified community health centers, which now serve 25 million Americans, $1.5 billion to help doctors and nurses working in underserved communities repay their student loans. He worked across the aisle with Republican Congressman Ron Paul to audit the Federal Reserve, revealing how the independent agency gave $16 trillion in near-zero interest loans to big banks and businesses after the 2008 economic collapse. And he helped double funding to help millions of low-income Americans heat their homes in winter. In 2010, he gave an 8.5-hour-long speech against the extension of the Bush tax cuts, which were the key reason, along with the Iraq War, for America's ballooning budget deficit. He is among the most outspoken senators on the issues of income inequality, climate change, and the desperate need for campaign finance reform. His approval rating in Vermont is 75%, making him one of the most, if not the most, popular elected officials in America. He currently holds 100% ratings from the following advocacy organizations: the ACLU, AFL-CIO, ARA, HRC, NAACP, NARL, and the SEIU. Sanders' presidential platform prioritizes the same positions he's fought for his entire career. Bernie is calling for free tuition at every public college and university in America, a $15 national minimum wage, a single-payer healthcare system, a $1 trillion jobs and infrastructure bill, comprehensive immigration reform, raising taxes on the wealthy and corporations, a carbon tax to address climate change, criminal justice reform to focus on rehabilitation, and, perhaps most importantly, restricting money's influence on politics by making all elections publicly financed. Bernie is relying on small donations from working Americans instead of the large donations and super PAC support that will power the campaigns of his rivals. According to the polls, all of these positions are relatively well supported by the American people. As Senator Sanders' populist message continues to spread across the country, we're about to find out if he can lead a movement strong enough to carry him into the White House. Thanks for watching. For the Daily Conversation, I'm Bryce Plank.
When we stand together, when we say enough is enough, this country belongs to all of us. When we do that, there is nothing we cannot accomplish. Thank you all very much. Instead of locking up our young people, maybe it's time we found jobs for them and education for them.
That guy you just saw giving that rousing speech, that's 73-year-old Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders. He's running for the Democratic nomination for president, and even though he'd be our oldest ever commander-in-chief, it turns out a lot of his biggest supporters are young enough to be his grandkids. And that is really going to matter in 2016 when just as many of us millennials will finally be able to vote as baby boomers. So why does the senior citizen have such a crazy, passionate fan base among 18 to 35-year-olds? We asked some Bernie fans to find out, and it turns out this may be the biggest reason.
That is why I, as president, will fight to make tuition in public colleges and universities free.
I was lucky enough to not have to take on student loan debt in order to go to college, but a lot of my friends are now saddled with like 6 figures worth of debt, and anyone who got a postgraduate degree, they're paying that off for the rest of their life.
And I think most of all, just to be able to not have a student debt that follows me forever really would be great.
The young people we spoke to were also big fans of Bernie's BS-free delivery and his progressive stance on social issues.
He represents, men, women, men of color, women of color, disabled people, and especially the LGBTQ plus communities.
Making elections publicly funded, overturning Citizens United, breaking up the biggest banks, and those are just some of his policies that are the policies that we need.
I've always really dug Bernie Sanders. I think he's kind of a goofy, but like really speaks his mind and genuine person.
He can't be bought.
But the big question is, can he beat out Hillary Clinton for the Democratic nomination? Bernie sure thinks so.
Would you be interested in being her vice president?
Would she be interested in being my vice president?
Mic drop. But seriously, Bernie's got good reason to be confident. Back in March, polls projected Hillary Clinton would grab 60.1% of the Democratic vote, with Bernie at just under 5%. Fast forward to September, and Bernie has surged to 24%, with Clinton tumbling to 42%.
Not everyone votes in primaries. It's the passionate voters that vote in the primaries, and the Bernie supporters are full of passion.
That they are. More than 100,000 people have shown up to Bernie's rallies in recent months. 100,000. I mean, those are Beyonce numbers, people. So while Sanders isn't a household name like Clinton or Bush or Trump, he's been at this whole politics thing for a long time.
He's fought for racial equality in the 60s. He marched on Washington with Dr. King. He led a sit-in to get the University of Chicago dorms desegregated when he was a student there.
He was in favor of same-sex marriage in the 70s. That's crazy.
Bernie's big jump from activist to bona fide politician happened in 1981, around the time the very first millennials were born, when he was elected mayor of Burlington, Vermont. And he's been in Congress since 1991, fighting for causes like raising the minimum wage and exploring alternative energy. So yeah, Bernie might be a senior citizen with wild white hair, but his dream of achieving civil rights, leveling the economic playing field, and tackling climate change is shared by a whole lot of millennials.
Frankly, I don't think his age has anything to do with it. I think that he's a very principled man, and I think where he stands on the issues is what excites our generation.
Oh man, if Bernie Sanders were in this room right now, I mean, first of all, I'd give him a hug. Just because he seems like a pretty huggable guy.
Don't tell me we can't provide a good healthcare system guaranteeing healthcare to all of our people. Don't tell me that we can't use technology to make sure that workers do not have to work 50 or 60 hours a week. Don't tell me that we can't have an excellent child care system and a great educational system in this country. Don't tell me that this great country and our young people cannot lead the world in transforming our energy system so the planet we leave to our kids and our grandchildren is one that is habitable. Don't tell me we can't do that. We can do that. But what we have to do to move forward is to take on the incredible greed and power of a handful of billionaire families who want it all. Honest to God, I cannot explain to you why a family like the Koch brothers, who are worth $85 billion, you might think that that is enough money. You might think that they're not quite worrying about feeding their families or their summer vacation, and yet they are spending huge amounts of money to destroy Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, public education, the Environmental Protection Agency. Now, why they are motivated to do that, I think a psychiatrist would have to examine. I don't understand. No, I really don't. No, I'm being very serious here. You know, we all have friends who have problems with alcohol, right? We have friends who have problems with drugs. But I think what you're looking at now is a certain number of very wealthy and powerful people who have a problem with greed and power. You bet. You know, and it's an addiction. They need more and more. And again, I don't know why you need billions more. Right? And we have got to stand united. And when we do that, there is nothing that we as a people cannot accomplish. It embarrasses me. It embarrasses me to tell you about what these other countries are doing for their people, and we're not doing it. But in order to do that, we do need a political revolution. Let me just simply tell you what that means. It means that you can't have elections as we did last November where 63% of the people don't vote, where 80% of young people don't vote. What we have to do is change our culture so that people understand that politics in a democratic society and involvement in the political process is what patriotism is about. So when people tell you, oh, you know, politics is all crap, why are you coming here on a beautiful afternoon to hear some senator from a state no one ever heard of? You know, why are you coming here? And you tell them because you're concerned about the future of this country. You want to hear ideas. And anyone who tells you that politics is not important, you ask them why the Koch brothers are going to spend $1 billion on this election. So if it's important for people who want to destroy Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, and federal aid to education, it is important for working families. So what I'm asking you to do is to help me make a political revolution in which we build a strong mass movement. I don't mind when wealthy people and the billionaires come out against me. I kind of expect that. But I do get upset in hearing working people voting for candidates who are going to send their jobs abroad, who are going to take their kids off of health insurance, who are going to make it harder to send their kids to college. I know that there are divisive issues. I know not everybody in this room is pro-choice. And there are probably divisions on guns, and there are divisions on gay marriage and all that stuff. I understand that. Fine, in a democratic society we can disagree. Trust me, my wife and I disagree. And I hear it all the time. All right. But on economic issues, let's reach out to our brothers and our sisters and our co-workers and our neighbors and say, no, don't vote against your kids and your parents. Don't vote for people who want to destroy Social Security and send your job abroad. If we do that, if we involve millions of people in this campaign, man, we can create a country the likes of which no one has ever seen. That's our mission, and I look forward to working with you to make that happen. Thank you very much.
What does your Jewish heritage mean to you, and how does it inform your policy positions, if at all?
Oh, good question. I'm proud to be Jewish, not particularly religious. And what the lesson that I learned as a little kid is understanding in a very deep way what politics is about. A guy named Adolf Hitler won an election in 1932. He won an election. And 50 million people died as a result of that election in World War II, including 6 million Jews. So what I learned as a little kid is that politics is in fact very important. Thank you. President Falwell and David, thank you very much for inviting my wife Jane and me to be with you this morning. We appreciate the invitation very much. And let me start off by acknowledging what I think all of you already know. And that is the views that many here at Liberty University have, and I, on a number of important issues are very, very different. I believe in women's rights and the right of a woman to control her own body. I believe in gay rights and gay marriage. Those are my views, and it is no secret. But I came here today because I believe from the bottom of my heart that it is vitally important for those of us who hold different views to be able to engage in a civil discourse. Too often in our country, and I think both sides bear responsibility for us, there is too much shouting at each other. There is too much making fun of each other. Now, and I say this as somebody whose voice is hoarse because I have given dozens of speeches in the last few months. It is easy to go out and talk to people who agree with you. I was in Greensboro, North Carolina just last night. All right. We had 9,000 people out. Mostly they agreed with me. And tonight, we're going to be in Manassas and have thousands out, and they agree with me. That's not hard to do. And that's what politicians, by and large, do. We go out and we talk to people who agree with us. But it is harder, but not less important, for us to try and communicate with those who do not agree with us on every issue. And it is important to see where, if possible, and I do believe it's possible, we can find common grounds. Now, Liberty University is a religious school, obviously. And all of you are proud of that. You are a school which, as all of us in our own way, tries to understand the meaning of morality. What does it mean to live a moral life? And you try to understand in this very complicated modern world that we live in what the words of the Bible mean in today's society. You are a school which tries to teach its students how to behave with decency and with honesty, and how you can best relate to your fellow human beings, and I applaud you for trying to achieve those goals. Let me take a moment, or a few moments, to tell you what motivates me in the work that I do as a public servant, as a senator from the state of Vermont. And let me tell you that it goes without saying, I am far from being a perfect human being. But I am motivated by a vision which exists in all of the great religions, in Christianity and Judaism, in Islam and Buddhism, and other religions. And that vision is so beautifully and clearly stated in Matthew 7:12. And it states, "So in everything, do to others what you would have them do to you. For this sums up the law and the prophets." That is the golden rule. Do unto others what you would have them do to you. That is the golden rule, and it is not very complicated. Let me be frank, as I said a moment ago. I understand that the issues of abortion and gay marriage are issues that you feel very strongly about. We disagree on those issues. I get that. But let me respectfully suggest that there are other issues out there that are of enormous consequence to our country and, in fact, to the entire world, that maybe, just maybe, we do not disagree on. And maybe, just maybe, we can try to work together to resolve them.
We know that you were in North Carolina last night. You're going to be in Manassas this afternoon. You continue to go from place to place, just meeting your staff. They're just incredibly hardworking people in this very fast pace where you and your wife are on the campaign trail with grandkids, and you're the liveliest 73-year-old I've ever met, sir. And how can we pray for you and your family? How can we be thinking of you? What can we, when we think of you and we see you on TV, what can we say? Bernie Sanders asked us to pray for him. He asked us to, what can we?
Well, David, thank you very much for that thought. I appreciate it from the bottom of my heart. But this is what I would like prayers to be for. Yes, sir. Not just for me. Far more significantly, are prayers for our country, prayers for how we bring our people together, prayers for how we can create in the wealthiest country in the history of the world a beautiful country, a country where all people have health care, where all kids who have the ability can go to college, where we have wiped out childhood poverty. Those are the prayers that I want to join with you in making.
Amen.
I think my message to you all today is a pretty simple one, and that is our country faces some enormous problems, and these problems are not going to be solved if people turn away from political struggle, if people throw up their hands in despair and say, I don't want to get involved, it's all crap. You are getting a great education here in Georgetown. And I hope very much you will use what you have learned here to fight to create a better world and to follow in the traditions of so many people for so many years who have struggled to create a more democratic and just society. Let me take you now back to the 1937. And in his inaugural address, in the midst of the Great Depression, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt looked out at the nation in the midst of this terrible depression. And this is what he saw, and this is what he talked about in his inaugural. He saw tens of millions of people denied the basic necessities of life. He saw millions of families trying to live on incomes so meager that the pall of family disaster hung over them every single day. He saw millions of his fellow Americans denied education, recreation, and the opportunity to better their lot and the lot of their children. He saw millions lacking the means to buy the products they needed, and by their poverty, by their lack of disposable income, denying employment to many other millions. Because when you don't have money to spend, you're not creating jobs for other people. He saw 1/3 of a nation ill-housed, ill-clad, and ill-nourished. And he acted against the ferocious opposition of the ruling class of his day, people he called the economic royalists. Roosevelt implemented a series of programs that put millions of Americans back to work, took them out of dire poverty, and restored their faith in government. He redefined the relationship of the federal government to the people of our nation. He combated cynicism, fear, and despair. He reinvigorated democracy. He transformed our country. And that is exactly what we have to do today. And by the way, almost everything he proposed, almost every program, every idea he introduced was called socialist. I thought I would mention that just in passing. Social Security, which all of you know transformed life for senior citizens in this country, was defined by his opponents as socialist. The concept of the minimum wage, that workers had to be paid at least a certain amount of money for their labor, was seen as a radical intrusion into the marketplace and was described as socialist. Unemployment insurance, when you lose your job, you have something to fall back upon. Abolishing child labor, ending the fact that children of 8, 10, 12 years of age were working in factories or working in the fields. The 40-hour work week, collective bargaining, the rights of workers to engage in negotiations with a union, strong banking regulations, deposit insurance, and job programs that put millions of people to work were all described in one way or another as socialist. Yet, as you all know, all of these programs and many more have become the fabric of our nation and, in fact, the foundation of our middle class. 30 years later, after Roosevelt's speech in the 1960s, President Lyndon Johnson fought for Medicare and Medicaid to provide health care to millions of senior citizens and families with children, persons with disabilities, and some of the most vulnerable people in this country. Today, Medicare does not seem to be such a terribly radical idea to say that when somebody gets old, they should have medical insurance, but when it was proposed, once again, we heard right-wing forces describe these programs as socialistic and a threat to the American way of life. That was then, now is now. Today, in the year 2015, despite the Wall Street crash of 2008, which drove this country into the worst economic downturn since the Great Depression, the American people are clearly better off economically than they were in 1937. But here is a very hard truth that we must acknowledge, we must address, we must not sweep under the rug. And that is, despite a huge increase in technology, and I can remember back, I was mayor of the city of Burlington, Vermont. Anybody here from Vermont? Okay. And when I was mayor in the 1980s, a radical development took place. We got computers in City Hall. Okay? 1980s. Despite a huge increase in technology and worker productivity, meaning that almost every worker in America with that technology is producing a lot more than workers that came before. Despite major growth in our GDP and a huge increase in the global economy, tens of millions of American families continue today to lack the basic necessities of life, while millions more struggle every day to provide a minimal standard of living for their families. And I hope none of you will turn your back on that reality. And the truth is, and again, this is a truth we must put on the table. Yes, we are better off today economically than we were 7 years ago when Bush left office. But the other truth is that for the last 40 years under Republican leadership and Democratic leadership, the great middle class of our country has been in decline, and faith in our political system is now extremely low. New technology, increased worker productivity, people working longer hours for lower wages, faith in our political system now extremely low. In my state of Vermont and all over this country, it is absolutely not uncommon to see people working 2 jobs or 3 jobs to cobble together the income and the health care they and their families need. In fact, Americans work longer hours than do the people of any other industrialized country. But despite the fact that our people are working so hard, I go around the country and I see a lot of working people, and you can see the stress and exhaustion on their faces. They're working crazy hours. Husbands hardly see wives. People don't have the quality time for their kids because they're working so hard just to bring in the income to survive. And despite all of that, despite our people working so hard, 58% of all new income generated today is going to the top 1%. Today in America, as the middle class continues to disappear, median family income is $4,100 less than it was in 1999. The median male worker made over $700 less than he did 42 years ago in inflation adjusted for dollars. Do you know why people are angry? They are angry because they are working terribly hard. And yet in real inflation adjusted for dollars, they are earning less. And they're looking all over and they say, what's happening? Why is that? But it's not just men. Last year, the median female worker earned more than $1,000 less than she did in 2007, and 58% of all new income goes to the top 1%. Today in America, the wealthiest country in the history of the world, that's what we are today, more than half of older workers have 0 retirement savings. Think about that. You're 50, 55 years of age, and you're thinking, all right, how am I going to retire? But because my wages have gone down, I have 0 in the bank for retirement. And at the same time, all over America, you got millions of seniors and people with disabilities trying to survive on $12,000 or $13,000 a year Social Security. From Vermont to California, older workers are scared to death, and they are saying, how am I going to retire with dignity? And I want all of you, you can get your calculators out, not now, when you leave here. Do some arithmetic and try to put yourself in the place of a senior citizen in my state of Vermont, where it gets cold in the winter, trying to survive on $13,000 a year. And you tell me how you are going to pay for the food that you need, heat your home, and buy the medicine that you need. And you know what? You can't do it. Today in America, nearly 47 million people are living in poverty, and over 20% of our children, including 36% of African American kids, are living in poverty, the highest rate of childhood poverty of almost any nation on earth. And what I want you to think about is, why is it in the wealthiest country in the history of the world, where we're seeing a proliferation of millionaires and billionaires, we have the highest rate of childhood poverty of almost any major country on earth. Today in America, 29 million Americans have no health insurance, and even more are underinsured with outrageously high co-payments and deductibles. In other words, people do have insurance, but I talk to people every day. They got a $5,000 deductible, $8,000 deductible. They can't go to the doctor when they need. And then on top of that, for a wide variety of reasons, our people pay the highest prices in the world for prescription drugs. And doctors tell me all of the time we prescribe something, a medicine for our patients, they can't afford to fill that medicine, that prescription. 1 out of 5 Americans cannot afford to fill the prescriptions their doctors write. What insanity is that? Today in America, youth unemployment and underemployment is over 35%. For African American kids, it is over 50%. Meanwhile, we have more people in jail than any other country. China, communist authoritarian country, 4 times our size, we have more people in jail than China, and countless lives are being destroyed as we spend $80 billion a year locking up our fellow Americans. The bottom line is that today in America, we not only have massive wealth and income inequality, but a power structure built around that inequality, which protects those who have the money. Today, a handful of super wealthy campaign contributors have enormous influence over the political process, while their lobbyists determine much of what goes on in Congress. And any member of the United States House or Senate who is prepared to tell you the truth will tell you exactly that. So let me take this opportunity to define for you, simply and straightforwardly, what democratic socialism means to me. It means building on what Franklin Delano Roosevelt said when he fought for guaranteed economic rights for all Americans. And it builds on what Martin Luther King Jr. said in 1968 when he stated, and I quote, "This country has socialism for the rich and rugged individualism for the poor," end of quote. In my view, some of the real heroes, well, heroines in our country today are single moms. And frankly, I do not know how single moms do what they do. I do not know how they go out to work. I do not know how they then take care of their kids. Anybody who's a parent knows how difficult that is under the best of circumstances. But to do it alone and without adequate income, wow, that is tough stuff. And many of these women are struggling desperately to raise their kids decently, with dignity. And if we can raise the minimum wage to a living wage, and if we can have pay equity in this country, we will give a real shot in the arm to millions of women so that they can be the kinds of mothers they want to be. You have a major political party that happens to control, unfortunately, the House and the Senate, which is rejecting science on the issue of climate. Now, it's interesting. I want you to think about it. I deal with these guys every day. I'm on the Health Education Committee. They don't reject science when it comes to cancer research. They look at the scientific evidence, and they may end up wanting to spend less money than I do, but they don't say, hey, these scientists are crazy. They don't reject science when it comes to Alzheimer's research or diabetes research. But on this issue, they categorically, not all of them, almost all of them, reject science. Why? I heard a magical 5-letter word, money. And this gets you right back to campaign finance reform. If some Republican candidate for president tomorrow gets up and says, you know, I just talked to some scientists, I just read some magazine articles. Climate change is real, and I'm worried about what's going to happen to my kids and my grandchildren. We got to transform our energy system. On that day, that Republican candidate would lose the support of the Koch brothers, who make most of their money through fossil fuel, and big energy companies. And that candidate would be primaried in the Republican primary. That's the simple fact. That's why Republicans do not speak out on climate change. Pretty sad state of affairs. And what our job is to tell them that in this moment when we have got to be aggressive, they should start worrying more about their children and grandchildren than their campaign contributors.
With the growing Islamophobia in this country, if you look at all the Republican candidates, in order to feed into their constituents, they're talking about Islamophobia and are constantly bashing Muslims in the media. Ben Carson, Donald Trump, the biggest bigots. As a Muslim student, as an American Muslim student who aspires to change this world, Thank you. As an American Muslim student who aspires to change the world, currently majoring in international conflict analysis and resolution major, and I hope to be a human rights attorney. Hearing the rhetoric that's going on in the media makes me sick, because I, as an individual, I'm constantly trying to raise awareness and make sure that everyone is treated equally in this country. So, to the next president of the United States, what do you think about that?
This is what I think. This is what I think. Let me be very personal here, if I might. I'm Jewish. My father's family died in concentration camps. I will do everything that I can to rid this country of the ugly stain of racism which has existed for far too many years. And let me tell you something. What racism is about is many, many things. It is pent-up hatred that is lashing out at people in uncontrollable and stupid ways, but it is something very different than that. For many years in this country, you have had politicians, and I'm old enough to know this, who played black off against white. So they told white workers who are earning pennies an hour, they said, hey, you think you're in trouble, but you're better off than the blacks who can't drink at a water fountain or go to your school. And they told straight people, well, you think you got problems, that you're better off than those gay people, right? And they told men against women. We played one group off against another. The rich got richer, everybody else is fighting with each other. Our job is to build a nation in which we all stand together as one people. And you are right. There is a lot of anger being generated and hatred being generated against Muslims in this country. That's absolutely correct. There is hatred being generated against immigrants in this country. And if we stand for anything, we have got to stand together and end all forms of racism. And I will lead that effort as President of the United States. Now, in terms of ISIS, in terms of national security, huge issue. Everybody understands that we're dealing with a barbaric organization that, at least in my view, has got to be crushed. The question is, what is the most effective way to do it? There are some out there who say, well, let's just send in the troops. Well, my feeling is that if the United States acts unilaterally, as we did in Iraq, and get involved in perpetual warfare in the Middle East, that will be a disaster. The way to destroy ISIS is putting together an international coalition in which the Muslim troops are the boots on the ground. This is what King Abdullah of Jordan is saying, where the large and powerful nations like the United States, UK, France, Russia are there to provide the air support and the tactical support that that coalition needs. That's my view.
I say to my Republican colleagues, yeah, we have got to be tough, but not stupid. And I do have to tell you that I am disturbed by some of what I am hearing from my Republican colleagues. And I will just say this. During these difficult times, as Americans, we will not succumb to racism. We will not allow ourselves to be divided and succumb to Islamophobia. And when hundreds of thousands of people have lost everything, have nothing left but the shirts on their backs, we will not turn our backs on the refugees from Syria and Afghanistan.
Bernie Sanders held a rare fundraiser today here in Manhattan in a Times Square theater. We'll show you our interview with Senator Sanders in just a minute. But first, here's how the event went down, starting with the passions of his supporters. We asked them to tell us the difference between Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton. Finish this sentence, fill in the blanks. Bernie is A, Hillary is B.
I think Bernie is a champion for the people. I think Hillary is a professional politician.
Bernie is the type of elected official that we need to run this country because he connects absolutely with working people. And quite frankly, Hillary Clinton is a corporate Democrat.
I think Bernie is genuine. Hillary, I think, is cautious and measured. And I say that as somebody who is cautious and measured. Bernie
is sincere, honest, classy, a gentleman, educated, has manners. He's the type of human being that I want to represent me and my country to the world.
What's up, New York?
He's coming on with us. They're coming on with us. Now we're going to find a man who carries that change, who's been carrying that change for decades. Ladies and gentlemen, Bernie Sanders. Thank you, Bernie.
Welcome to the revolution. Thank you all very much.
Bernie is honest. Bernie works for the people.
He speaks about issues that are affecting a majority of the American people right now.
Before he declared, right, I thought, fabulous. A woman coming in. And then the more I listened to Hillary, I was going, oh, I'm not going to vote gender. I want to vote character. And then when Bernie announced, I was like, yes!
All across this country, there is a significant alienation from the political process. People look to Washington and they throw their hands up and they say, what in God's name is going on there? Why aren't our senators and our congressmen paying attention to our needs? Why aren't we developing a rational foreign policy rather than talking again about getting involved in a quagmire in the Middle East, which could lead to perpetual warfare? So let me conclude just by saying this. The problems that we face as a nation are indeed very, very serious. I've talked on some. There's a lot we haven't even touched upon. But by and large, all of these problems were caused by bad human decisions. And if we come together, if we stand together, if we do not allow ourselves to be divided up by race, by whether we're gay or whether we're straight, whether we're born in America or we weren't born in America, whether we're a male or a female, if we stand together and if we focus on how we can create sane foreign policy, how we can rebuild the middle class, how we can combat climate change, how we can create a nation in which we end racism and homophobia. If we are prepared to do that, if you, as young people, are prepared to engage in the political process, I have no doubt that there is nothing that together we cannot accomplish. Thank you all very much.